Good evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury.
I feel like I should start by breaking into it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, which it probably I'm going for the line a bit soon. We're still 3 weeks away, but it feels like the whole sort of political landscape has got a bit of a feeling of starting to wind down for the old Christmas break, Simon.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I don't know whether it's a wind down or just the end of the wind up that's happened over the summer and the autumn. So it's been a bit. It's been a bit hectic, hasn't it? We've certainly lived in interesting times, and maybe everyone else has just kind of come to the conclusion that, sod it. The general's not for 18 months away. No one's going to be daft enough to call one any sooner. Nothing else is kind of really happening. Let's just everyone kind of sneak off to Christmas, and we'll come back at it with a new year.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit like kind of with everything that's gone on, the sort of boiling maelstrom of leadership elections and plots and schemes and et tu bruti and would you like Rishi Sunak? No, we wouldn't like Rishi Sunak. You sure you don't want Rishi Sunak? No, we definitely won't Rishi Sunak. Congratulations, you've won Rishi Sunak. Yeah, guess with all of that going on, there's an element of it just all needs to calm down a bit. And as you say, at that sort of national level, we're 18 months away from an election. Locally, I think we've got a bit of a brew heading towards, is it February, the great fun of the budget?
Yes, the excitement that will be the budget.
Yes.
Yeah, so we'll see kind of how that turns out. But yeah, to quote Gavin Williamson, it does sound like everybody has decided to shut up and go away for Christmas.
Yeah, and yeah, I think there's very much that feel about it, and we thought, well, in the spirit of the general apathy and pre-Christmas running, we'd focus on the full council for Tuesday, the last chance of the year. Who knows whether there'll be sherry and mince pies? I doubt it. But yeah, so this is the last full gathering, and I guess there'll be one more in January before the big budget bust up in February. So I think that's what we'll bill it as.
We're trying to see if we can do better on the alliteration there. But essentially, yeah, this is just the calm before the storm that is inevitably the bust up at the budget, and then the lead into the local elections in May. So yeah, in some ways, I don't know if we're underselling it to say it's a bit of a non-event. But remember the times when we used to have sessions where there was 11 notices of motion, and they were going on for hours and hours, and this one, 5 notices of motion, 1 petition, and 1 urgent item discussed.
Yeah, it all seems a little bit more kind of, everyone just seems to have calmed down a bit. We'll go through a little dig into the detail and see whether there's anything there that excites us. I'd like to consider ourselves to be a fair barometer of the local politics mood, and we've probably got quite a keen eye for the notice of motion now, which is to see whether there is anything, shall we say, substantive behind it, or whether we call upon this house to suggest that Simon smells of wee, and I don't mean the French perfume. Those kind of rather pointless motions that tend not to get voted through. So we'll have a dig about.
Yes, we'll have a dig. But yes, but there is also one item that isn't a notice of motion, it isn't originally kind of into the agenda, but has been snuck in as an urgent matter that needs discussing.
Shall we start with that, or shall we start with the petition? The choice is yours.
Oh, Well, let's hear the voice of the people first. Let's talk about the petition first. Let's get to the petition. So the petition is so that's item 7 on the agenda, and that's a petition from Portsea Action Group. Basically, with over any petition that's submitted to the council with more than 500 signatures has to be presented at council and debated at council. That doesn't necessarily mean that it ends in a of any sort. It just means that it's presented to the council, and that they get to discuss it, and the cabinet get to give an official response. So yeah, it's a petition to reinstate GPs at the John Pounds Medical Centre. They're calling out the issues that essentially there hasn't been a GP at the John Pounds Centre since it merged with another GP practice in the city just around kind of the start of COVID. So they've been without GP services there for quite some considerable time, and considering that was meant to be a temporary issue, that doesn't really seem to have turned out to be all that temporary. So it will be interesting to see what the presenter of the petition is going to say, making her statement. That's Deborah Edwards, and also what the council's response is going to be to that. But we've talked about GPs before, haven't we? We've talked about the issue of there aren't enough GPs in the city. So
from memory, wasn't Lee the LibDem working on an active petition to go to government about GP services, or was that dentists? I might have been both, but no, I mean it's a very difficult issue, isn't it? In terms of, there is a shortage of GPs. Every surgery's got vacancies, and I guess there's an element of, if you've got a surgery that's meant to be in 2 places, and you're short of staff, then it would seem natural to me to consolidate those resources in one place. And I guess it does speak to, there is an element for me of, as somebody who's now had several telephone consultations, there's a bit of me that thinks, well, do we really need GPs physically very close to residents? Or what percentage could be done much more effectively and efficiently as a telephone consultation?
I guess with GPs, obviously COVID's taught lots of people how to use Zoom a lot more, and how to work effectively remotely, or helped them discover and really thrash out what things don't work effectively remotely. And for some people that works, and for some people that doesn't. I guess the ideal would be that you've got the availability there, but that you're essentially providing the choice to the patient as to which is the most effective choice for them as to how they want to be seen and helped. Now that's obviously easier to staff if they don't have to be in a geographical location. But there are some issues and certainly some patients that would much benefit, I'm sure, from face to face. So it's not one or the other, is it? It's a question of having all of those things in your palette of things to choose, isn't it? But whether there's a need to have one geographically in that part of the city as opposed to a couple of miles away, it's probably quite a distance. If you think that there wasn't I think we're both probably members at the same practice in Cosham. If you think of a similar distance, if there wasn't then another practice until North End, wouldn't that be a bit of a problem?
I guess it would, but there's an element of, there's a part of me that I guess, in terms of, and this is where it becomes I guess it becomes an issue about, well, is it a matter of choice for the patient, or is it, with limited resources, is it a matter of the GP practice organising themselves in such a way that they can provide a service to the majority of patients. Again, if I look at the statistics on missed appointments, which I think says that 1 in 4 people who book and this is a pre-COVID stat, 1 in 4 who book a physical appointment don't turn up, then I guess if you don't turn up to your telephone appointment, there is 30 seconds of the phone ringing, the doctor in question going, oh, well, strike that one from the list, move on to the next one on the list. So, yeah, I think it's, I guess it's kind of what we've all grown up with and what we've come to expect. And I guess there's a question that says, well, I'm sure I remember that, previously when sort of children have been, the concept of doctors making house calls is I think is a thing of the past. The consolidation of out of hours services into one place. I don't know whether this isn't just the next evolution of seeing the doctor, and whether, as you said, once that way of working is known, whether you can't or maybe shouldn't unknow it. But so yeah, it will be interesting to see what the council's response is. But I don't know that the council has any sway to force the practice in question to create or to ensure. I don't think there's any way that they can, or force, if we want a better word.
I don't think they have any powers to direct a surgery or a group of surgeries where they put their staff, but they can. I mean, I'm sure that they would be listening to the council, but they still have to make a decision based on where that resourcing is going to be the most effective and get to be able to see the most patients. But then again, we shall see. But a petition coming to council, the full council don't get to.
We don't see them often, do we?
No, we don't see them often. I mean, it's quite a useful political device for parties to use in order to gauge what things are basically really pressing the buttons of the electorate. It's also let's be honest, a good way of being able to a contact base of people that are thinking the same way you're thinking. And if you're thinking the way I'm thinking, you should think about voting for me. If you're thinking what I'm thinking,
yeah,
is kind of that sort of thing. But from a perspective of, yes, the full council will discuss it. Does that result in a change of policy? And even if it does, would that mean that the council can direct the surgery in question to put staff there? I'm not sure that's something they can do. That's something we should probably ask Matthew Winnington and to see, but we'll see what their response is on Tuesday. We're getting a comment in the live stream in the chat, basically saying that face-to-face is preferable, and I think for lots of people that genuinely is. They prefer that kind of human context. There's got to be a way of doing a bit of both.
Well, and I guess that, but this is part of the challenge, though, isn't it? Is that face-to-face is preferable, but then I guess that there are people who would say that, as I touched on, that the hospital, the doctor on call, house call was preferable. I'm sure there are some people for whom, the out of hours service, with a generic GP is, for them would be less agreeable than their own GP. But I think this is where the service is evolving, and we've gone away from the one GP with a consulting room in their house. Just it feels like an evolution to me, and I guess that's it's one of the questions around kind of having a universal healthcare provision that the state pays for, is that how much patient choice is there, or is it a case of a minimum and adequate service has to be provided at the lowest possible cost? One for a future show, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's one to kind of tease out. I think we've touched on it before, but I think the fact that GP surgeries are actually a private business.
Yep.
They're in themselves. basically contracted to conduct NHS services on behalf of the NHS. To me, it seems like a very similar model to the way that banks and post offices have gone. Society's changed, our needs and our ways of interacting with things have changed, and forgive me, I'm going to sound, the traditional capitalist model of that should be a business that stands on its own 2 feet. Well, it doesn't stand on its own 2 feet in lots of areas, so you need to support it, because the cost of not having it there is actually considerably greater to that community than just the financial cost. It's to me, it's worth more than just the spreadsheet. But I'll let you say that's another show. We could spend the evening talking about that.
No, absolutely, and again, it's similar to a conversation we had a few months ago about the council calling upon the banks to ensure that there was banking provision. I think in the Hillsey sort of North End area, where you can call on them all you like, but if at the end of the day, it's that people.
Well, the bank's response is going to be, okay, is the council going to give me subsidy to help me keep the branch open?
Well,
No, we're not going to do that. Well, okay then, decisions made.
And it is interesting. I was at the, again, the world is changing and evolving, and we'll see how that unfurls. But there was an urgent matter, a point of order, if you will.
Yes, indeed. So, well, not a point of order, but basically, so there was a matter of urgent business. So the proportionality, so the representatives in which political groups sit on which particular committees or panels as part of the council. There's a table basically that allocates those on the basis of the number of seats that particular party has. So that's why it's important that that's why it rewards people grouping into political parties. And with the news this week that Councillor Judith Smyth is being investigated by the National Labour Party. So while they're conducting that investigation, because they've received a complaint, they've suspended her from the party. So while that means that's ongoing, she's currently the chair of the planning committee.
Yes.
So that kind of opens up, and amongst other things, so that opens up a whole conversation as to kind of how the council needs to kind of deal with that. So there'll be a bit of horse trading and a bit of communication and a bit of back and forth as to, well, if effectively that means that the Labour group are losing a member, even if that is a temporary position, that does mean that that basically things need to kind of go out. So so the point that was issued by the council was that with Councillor Smyth no longer a member of the Labour group, and is therefore consequently a now non-aligned independent councillor on the council, because don't forget that's the National Labour Party suspending her for the court for an investigation. They don't have any power to remove her as a councillor, and indeed the council don't.
And I think that's where it's important.
And all of those things are, let's have an investigation, and indeed that's been her response. She's been quoted in the Evening News as effectively saying, we have processes to investigate these things. I hope the investigation's conducted soon and smoothly, but it's important that these things are investigated. And it's worth also commenting that the Labour group leader on Portsmouth City Council, Cal Corkery, states that she enjoys his full support, and that he's hopeful that the party will conclude its investigation and reinstate her membership as a matter of urgency. So we're not a stranger on Portsmouth City Council, sadly, to there being suspensions, albeit them temporary suspensions, while investigations are undertaken by the respective parties. That's happened a couple of times to Conservative councillors in the last recent years. So we shall see. This one, we don't know what the particular source of the issue is, but at the end of the day, it's got to be investigated. That means that some juggling needs to go on about how many people have representation on which panels.
Yeah, and I think this one is an interesting one, because one of the questions we received through the Portsmouth Politics Facebook group was, well, you know, you vote for a person, not a party. And I think in terms of the chairs of the committees, my memory of those was they were voted on. People were voted into the chair position, as well as there being a sort of allocation of folk throughout the different committees. So, because obviously we had a bit of a hoo-ha, didn't we, after last May, when the Labour and Conservatives found a bit of love for each other to ensure that the chairs of some of the panels were divvied up amongst themselves, rather than some of the other parties. So, yeah, I think this one is an interesting one. It could end up being a fuss over nothing. In the, you know, by the time, I'm sure, the 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 council has got its spreadsheet out and worked out if Judith's now a non-aligned independent, what does that mean in terms of, you know, who's the person who should get the next seat, or do they have to have elect a new chair of planning, or does the deputy step up? I'm sure there's all sorts of rules and wranglings to go on, and probably by the time they've done it all, there's every chance the investigation will be over, and Judith will be back sat with the red team. So we'll see how that all unfolds. I'm sure somebody will get aerated about it.
I'm sure that someone will claim that it's unfair how they're distributed, because it seems that it's the age-old thing of, isn't it? But the ref has been unkind to us and kind to the other guys, but the other guys are also claiming the ref has also been unkind to them.
Oh yeah,
unkind to you.
oh, yeah.
So it's the look. There are quite simple mechanisms to calculate, or well, we say simple. We're not going to explain them because we don't quite understand them ourselves. But essentially, there's a nice table on the PDF that's on the website. There's a link in the comments to the event that I've put in that basically, if people really wanted to go and get down into the bottom of it, but essentially, okay, this just changes some things because you need to be a member of that group. Your ability to sit on those panels or committees stems from you being a member of that political grouping on the council. And if you're no longer a member of that political grouping, you're still a councillor, but you don't get to be part of their I don't want to say entourage, but part of their posse that are therefore then, you know, there's quite a list. So Councillor Smyth is she's a Labour group appointment on the planning committee, as well as the chair, the governance and ordnance standard committee, the Education, Children and Young People Scrutiny Panel. She also has a Labour group standing deputy on both the Housing and Social Care Scrutiny Panels and the Scrutiny Management Panel. In addition, she was also the Labour group opposition spokesperson for the Planning Policy and City Development Portfolio, which is a matter for the group leader to assign. So that's not something the council itself gets to, you know, the full council gets to decide itself. That's a matter for the group. But yeah, it's again, we'll move all of the pieces into what is a pragmatic, agreeable position, and then by the time everything's happened and it's next year and we're back again, that's the severe likelihood isn't it, that we'll have to go and undo it again anyway.
It'll all blow over. It will all blow over. Right, let's move on to the notices of motion. What have we? Just the 5 this month, which is again a bit of a skinny offering by comparison. So let's start at the top and work down, shall we?
Yeah. So notices of motion. If anyone kind of realised that we might have played a little bit with our, you know, we have a bit of a penchant for whimsical titles. So we went for Very Little Help ? As our title this week. But this one is, so this kind of really stems from, there was a question to a cabinet member from one of the members of the PIP.
Yep.
Of the PIPs. So the Portsmouth Independence Party, at the last full council, basically about how did they come to the decision of where they were going to reallocate the recycling points to from Tesco in North Harbour, because there was disquiet about where they'd basically be chosen to be put in Port Solent and in Paulsgrove. And the conversation there, for those of you that actually watched the footage as I did. For my sins, that was just punishment that day. But there was even conversation then of, well, perhaps this should be something brought back to full council. And do you know what? Here it
As if
is.
by magic.
Yeah, as if by magic. Here is the one basically calling on. So, and what's interesting about this motion is that it's proposed by the council, the LibDem council leader Gerald Vernon Jackson, seconded by the Labour group leader Cal Corkery, but also supported by George Madgwick, of the Portsmouth Independence Party. And essentially, it says, look, the council regrets that Tesco have made the decision to remove their recycling facilities from its Fratton and Port Solent stores, and remarked about supermarkets sell huge amounts of products in packaging that can be recycled, and supermarkets should be doing more to be cutting down on packaging and waste. Instead, they've removed these facilities to allow local residents allowing local residents to recycle at their stores, and the council regrets the actions of Tesco, who seem to be putting company profits before care of the environment, and asked Tesco to bring back recycling centres in their Portsmouth stores. Yeah. So basically, please, Mr. Tesco, can you put your recycling banks back in? Thanks.
Yeah, and this is one of those funny ones, isn't it? And again, it's got kind of universal or almost universal support across the political spectrum. But it's a little bit for me of a bit of a virtue signal and a bit of a shouting into the void, because I'm guessing there is an element of, for Tesco's, there must have been, whilst there is a benefit for providing that service to their customers, there also must have been a cost. And if we look at it from a, again, I'm trying to remember, because we use the North Harbour one regularly, the bottle bank that was there, and I think there was a clothes bank as well. But there's an element of, somebody at Tesco's will have done the sums, won't they? Because there is an element of, they are a business, not a charity. And so, yeah, kind of, well, you could almost, and again, if I was being provocative and I was a member of the management team of T. Stockwell and Cohen, I'd be offering Portsmouth Council, if they wanted to install bottle banks in the corners of my car park and come and take them away and empty them and bring fresh ones back, I'm sure we could come to some kind of agreeable financial arrangement to allow the city council to do that. Is it Tesco's job or not?
Well, I do think it's the responsibility of the organisations that create or are the source of the materials that need recycling to be part of the solution. And if they want the need of recycling to reduce, then there are things they can do about reducing their packaging, or removing, the packaging. Yep. And I know that all major retailers have made moves along those lines to reduce the amount of packaging, but to be a major source of the issue, it's almost like McDonald's deciding that they're not going to have rubbish bins outside their restaurants because they're not happy with the fact that people keep putting rubbish on the floor.
Yeah,
that's not going to get better. I think the reason they cited was because people were fly tipping. So if people were fly tipping, that to me sounds like this is a solution to a different problem, not a solution to this one.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, if you're fly tipping...
And this is an unintended consequence, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, for me, if you're fly tipping, you're going to fly tip whether there's a bottle bank there or not, aren't you? If you can drive into that space in the dead of night and unload a builder's lorry full of scrap and drive off, if that's your thing, I don't think the presence of a bottle bank will again, a wang about, lads. We shouldn't be fly tipping it here. There's no recycling facilities anymore. We better go and find a country lane to dump this down. I'm not sure I kind of follow that logic through. But there's
But
an
I
element.
think that might be just for because when I walk past the bottle bank that's just down the road from me at Highbury College, quite often that's overflowing. Quite often the bottle bank, it's full, and rather than take stuff back with them, people would just pile it up outside the bottle bank in bags and just
Right.
leave it there. And to be honest, I'd suspect that from the volume of it, either people are having a lot more parties than they used to, or perhaps actually some businesses are using that as a way to get rid of having to pay for that material to be collected. And either way, that's an output of a different problem.
Yes.
Not the one that we're kind of talking about. So I think it's a solution to a different problem. So we've got some comments that Kimberly Barrett, so the cabinet member for the environment and climate change. Sorry, Kimberly, I've forgotten the official title. But they do have environmental sustainability policies to adhere to, and a lot of the waste that is recycled comes from their stores. We have talked to them as a council to work on things together, and they were not interested. And David also quotes, Tesco can always withdraw their recycling facilities. Like Ian said, they are a business and not a charity. The issue then is the lack of recycling glass by the local authority. It's ridiculous that this has not been addressed, but maybe that's the problem with the austerity. Happy Christmas. And then friend of the pod, Scott Peter Harris, has told us to leave it out, lads, because it's coming home. I don't think he's talking about the recycling.
No. So I think this was our dilemma, wasn't it? About the fact that at 7 o'clock, England are playing foot to the ball against Senegal, and as we know, the eponymous, the splendidly named Scott Pater Harris, allegedly both loves football and is a season ticket holder at Portsmouth, which some might say is mutually exclusive. But anyway, I think he is. We spoke about the Venn diagram of the followers of the podcast and those who favour association football, and I think we may have found the crossover in Scott Pater Harris, who is
he's the one person in that spot in the middle of the Venn diagram.
He is that. So I know, and I think there is an element of businesses do have social responsibilities, and I do get that. But I think that the piece for me, and again, it's I must confess, Simon, I've always found the whole recycling thing a bloody irritation, but I've become conditioned to it. And the fact is that when we got our wheelie bins, and we've got two big recycling bins now, and one refuse bin that's the size of a cram's eye socket. And we in theory have a food waste bin, although ours was stolen some 5 weeks ago, and we, despite several attempts to get a new chum bucket delivered, it's not there. But I digress. But for me, there's an element of we do the recycling, and the vast majority of the we can recycle everything pretty much, with the exception of, as I think David points out, the glass bottles are not recyclable. So you then have the option as to whether you diligently nip there when you have one bag, or you stow them somewhere and then make a pilgrimage only to find that the bottle bank is full. And now I never would, but obviously some people then just unload the car and pile them up in a impromptu sculpture. But I don't think it's Tesco's problem to solve, because to quote the BBC, other supermarkets are available.
They are indeed. Kimberly's offered to chase the food bin for you. And Scott Peter Harris wishes as well. So thank you very much, both. But I still remain convinced that they're part of the problem. And there is I know what I've heard talked about the reasons why we don't do curbside glass collections in the city, but we will digress completely if we'll just have to give up entirely on our. running to order
Yes.
if we went into that. So
Yeah, no,
um,
and to be fair, there are people that will.
mm,
Yeah, no, we had a leaflet a while back that said, "Would you like us to come and recycle your glass?" And they will give you a small box for you to put your glass in, and for I think best part of a tenner a
oh,
week, they'll come and pick it up. But
spoilers, Kimberly tells us that glass collection is coming.
oh, like in the style of holidays are coming. So
Or
yes,
winter.
yes,
So
either or. So yeah, no, and look, I can see why there's a grumpiness towards Tesco's for their cruel and rather spiteful taking it away. But unfortunately, I think this is a notice of motion. Everyone's going to jolly violently agree that Tesco are cads and or bounders, and Tesco are going to adopt the am I bothered response.
yeah, I mean, Conservative Council Group leader Simon Bosher was quoted in the Evening News as basically saying, "Do we really want to be picking a fight with Tesco? Because at some point we're going to be wanting to work with them for several community reasons, and we probably shouldn't just be picking a fight with them." So, so that kind of like that one. So, shall we move on to item B, 12B?
Yes, yeah. So we're sort of, I think the Pompey Politics podcast is sort of grudgingly giving a yeah, go on. We're not going to disagree with you, but
Oh, I did. To make it clear, I disagreed with you about whether Tesco should be part of the problem, part of the solution to the problem that they cause. 17 years of working for them didn't colour my opinion of them at all. So
yeah, I only did the two and a half.
yeah.
So
Okay, so item 12B is a Labour motion from Councillor Charlotte Gerarda, and it's seconded by Judith Smyth. So I'm not sure if she'll still be allowed to second it if
yeah,
she's
you
no
can say
longer a
you
member
can.
of that group, but
No,
I think
anybody can
she'll be
say.
all right.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I mean, look, Cal's been very open that she still has the Labour group support, and I think, whilst the National Labour Party may have withdrawn her membership, which means she's forced to sit as a non-aligned independent, in the same way that other councillors before have been non-aligned independents, they're still pretty well bloody aligned with their party of choice. So yeah, I don't think anything will change here. So what's Charlotte asking for?
So Charlotte's motion here. So what thing I've noticed with the Labour motions recently is they're usually quite they're laid out in detail and bullet pointed out as to kind of what the issues are, and they also include links to their references. So I think it's I don't know. I just find it worth remarking on the difference between some motions are literally one sentence, and some go on for quite a while, whereas the Labour groups seem to be writing their motions to build a case. So it's almost, it's almost like these are why we think this is the issue. These are the sources that we've got for why we think this is an issue, and this is what we think the solution is. So this one is talking about everyone needing to and deserving the right to feel safe, regardless of age, ability, and location in the city, and that asking basically the cabinet to either extend the We Stand Together project and sign up to the Safe Spaces national network, so that various groups are included in the Safer Spaces scheme, to request the implementation of the scheme, that there's an educational program, and it's run into schools to make young people aware of how the initiative can benefit them, so that they know that it's there. To request that officers proactively approach potential premises and develop a map of safe spaces that's published for everyone to be able to see, and ensure that young people and their parents and other relevant groups are invited to form a working group. So, essentially, this is saying we could be doing more to make sure that there are places of safety that people from a variety of different groups can go to, especially and the motion kind of cites young people, calls them out, so they've got somewhere safe that's not going to be somewhere where they're going to be exposed to trouble or issues and things like that. And this is just basically saying, could we actually join that up a bit, please, and make sure that everybody knows about it?
So I read this, and I have to say I've got to commend Charlotte and the Labour team for the thoroughness, as you say, of the motion, and again, the goodness of it is one of those things that you follow through the logic, and there's references in there about county lines and how they exploit vulnerable youngsters to do their work for them, and it all makes absolute sense. And I think this is one of those initiatives, endeavors, projects that I don't see how anyone is going to object to creating safe spaces for vulnerable people, be they young, old, disabled, or have learning difficulties, whatever that is. It makes sense. I think that with this one, the devil's in the detail, and the detail for me at first glance looks really expensive, because ultimately, if you're going to create a safe space for vulnerable children and adults, at the very forefront of what you do has to be safeguarding. So if you are going to undertake this as an organisation, as the council, you've got to be absolutely certain that those spaces are safe spaces, and the people who are running those, supporting those, are appropriately vetted, and that it doesn't become a recruitment hub for those who would seek to exploit the vulnerable. And I think this is where the challenge in this motion comes. And unfortunately, the piece that isn't referenced, there's good references to Eastleigh and Southampton and I think some other, is what does it cost? We had when we looked at the autumn statement a couple of weeks ago, we had Steve Pitt on from the council, who was very, very concerned at the plight that councils are going to be in terms of having to cover the bills with inflation, with the minimum wage going up, all of those cost pressures coming on to councils. And I do wonder whether tabling this as a potential uncosted new initiative, excellent as it is, you can't cut corners in areas like this when it comes to safeguarding and putting in those checks and balances to make sure that your spaces are safe.
No, you can't. I mean, that could swerve us into a wider conversation about how the funding for non-mandatory, I mean, even the funding for mandatory local government schemes has reduced over the last 10, 12 years. And therefore, the non-mandatory stuff becomes the place where the finances get pinched. But some of these things, they might not necessarily be mandatory, but they are a higher priority than a nice to have. I guess the fundamental question, and if we had the answer, then to be honest with you, we'd be worth a lot more money than we both currently are. Is how do you prioritize that? And to govern is to choose and to make those choices. But fundamentally, having facilities that vulnerable groups and that young people can use and then be safe, I think it's a given for them to be run by people that are vetted and are safe, and they're run responsibly. But you're right. The question is this just asking for an extension or more communication about the facilities that are already there, and joining those dots up, which is also a valid ask, which might not necessarily cost that much more. It's just a question of making sure that people know that these things are available. But if it's providing things that don't already exist, then obviously that costs a lot more. But you could also argue that the cost of them not being there leads to all sorts of other issues about isolation, about poor mental health, about street crime, about antisocial behavior, about drug use. That actually, if you look at the wider thing of it, the cost benefit analysis of spending that money, you can make the case, to return to your point, you need to make the case of where you get the money from in the first place.
Well, and I think you're right, Simon. And I think the challenge of your cost benefit analysis is that, is that there is that element of you can do all the cost benefit analyses in the world, but if you don't have the money there, you can't spend it. Is it good sense to send your car for a service every year? Yes, of course it is. But the question of to whether you've got the £300 to do that now, yes, you potentially are going to involve a £2,000 broken bit on your car in 3 years' time, and it's the right thing to do. But if you don't have the £300 today, your car isn't broken today, so you'll hope to get away with it. And I think this actually frames a lot of the dilemma that is going to come to the council in February. And I think there is very much going to be in terms of making those choices, and I know, without misquoting Steve, I know Steve is very passionate about, the arts and, music and that sort of vibrancy that comes to the city, which, again, I'm a huge supporter of, but I know that there's an element of, well, and I'll just pick something out of thin air, the cost of putting on all the bandstand events, if you knock those on the head, that would give you your money for this initiative. And you can say, well, yeah, but the two are, again, it's that element of, as you said, to govern is to choose. And I think there is an element of whatever choice is made in this upcoming budget. There's going to be a lot of people who are saying, well, you've chosen the wrong thing. And I think whilst this one for me, this for me feels expensive, and it's that element of, I wonder whether the answer is going to be, well, okay, yep, makes absolute sense, but almost that needs to be costed up as to what this would cost to put on in Portsmouth. And to your point, even if it's just education and joining the dots, well, somebody's got to go and deliver that education to the children of Portsmouth and the youth of Portsmouth, and it's right that somebody should need to be paid to do that. So yeah, I think this one looks for me to be the right thing to do, but it looks like a financial minefield to me.
Okay. Well, the financial minefields are going to get opened in February, aren't they? So that's when we'll start mine hunting across those minefields, and then hopefully we'll have an in-house economist or financial expert that will be able to speak
to all of that
about those matters with authenticity. So item 12C, which was the support of the WASPI women.
Yes, and again, this again, as time's moving on, the plight of the WASPI women, and again, we won't go into it in detail, but effectively, it was the changing of the government for the age of retirement jumped from 60 to 65, which left a number of women who were, planning to retire in the next 1 or 2 years, thrown into turmoil. And I think there's been a lot of legal kind of wrangling in the background about how appropriate, or in fact inappropriate, that was. But I guess this is one where we're calling upon the council to do something and write a letter or write some letters.
You're literally lost for words.
I am, because I always think the one that says, dear Gerald Vernon Jackson, thank you for your letter dated such and such and such and such. We recognise that this is an important issue, and on behalf of the people of Portsmouth, you brought it to our attention. This is something that we are actively aware of and working to disenfranchise the discombobulation of the retribution of the back funding, and value your ongoing support in this matter. Yours sincerely, blah, blah, blah. Letters are exchanged, but nothing changes.
No, and that's something we've kind of spoken on before. But just to summarize kind of the case on this, it's about those women whose retirement ages have been delayed.
Yep.
And those women may well have been women who've looked after older relatives during the course of their working life, so therefore haven't been able to contribute as much into their pension. So they've again been involved in caring activities, responsibilities fall disproportionately more towards women than not, and that leaves some of them in basically left in poverty and struggling to meet their housing needs, and therefore it's calling on the full council to basically to support the campaign and to write to the local members of parliament and the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to outline the effects and the injustice to 1950s women in the community in Portsmouth and seek for an immediate compensation package. And again, that becomes a choice of where you spend the money question, because the demographics of how the pension scheme works, you're not paying into a pot to save for your pension. The national insurance you're paying now is paying the pensions of people that are drawing pensions down now. And it's an injustice to these women, but also how do we square that at the same time of we have a much lower ratio of the number of working age people contributing to the national insurance scheme than are people drawing on it now than there were in the 50s when these women would have started their working lives. So it's not an easy one to crack.
It's not, Simon, and please don't anybody misunderstand my dismissive nature of this. Is not about the plight of the WASPI women, who I believe have been extremely hard done by, and whatever what it says in the motion is absolutely true. I guess for me it's whether a strongly worded letter from Gerald Vernon Jackson to the members of Parliament and or the Department of Work and Pension will do anything other than make a contribution to recycling. That's where I have my issue.
Yeah, well, I'd have thought that Labour could have got the Labour MP for Portsmouth South to look at it anyway, and I should imagine both MPs for the city would have had on record whether they support the campaign or not. So I think I get where you're kind of coming from. There isn't an easy answer to that. Is the simple truth.
Correct.
So this one should hopefully be a quick one. So to D, which was the Conservative motion, so from Cosham Councillor Matthew Atkins and seconded by John Smyth. Basically, now we're out of COVID, why do we need to book appointments for the household waste recycling centre at Portsmouth? You shouldn't have to.
So as a person who went to Portsmouth Recycling Centre only this week.
Oh, that's how thorough our research is.
Topical we were by happy accident rather than anything else. So I can answer this, Councillor Matt Atkins and John Smyth. The answer is, during the autumn and the winter, it doesn't matter a jot, really. We could bin the booking system straight away. Is the booking system enforced? There was nobody there with a clipboard when we turned up. The difference is when it gets to the summer, because when it gets to the summer, particularly a summer weekend, what used to happen pre-COVID is everybody would clear their garden on the first shiny weekend of the year, and that queue of cars would be from the recycling centre back out onto the road, and you'd sit in it with all of your pollution spewing out of your car for 3/4 of an hour before you'd finally get in to unload your car. So answer for me is, since that's been in place, any time of the year, you book your slot, you turn up, you unload your car, you drive off again. It's much smoother. It just works better. Let's not change it.
Okay. Well, we won't
No,
we won't labour that point then.
Nope.
So 12E, celebrating local sportswomen. So from councillors Ryan Brent and Linda Symes. talking about the success of the of this year's national success in women's sport, where the Lionesses won the Euro football competition and the England Red Roses reached the Rugby World Cup final. None of these words mean much to me, I have to be honest.
No,
but at least one of them means something to you.
Oh yeah, I'll help you out with this one, Simon.
Can you translate into
I
person
will
that doesn't
do.
play sport?
I will do. So the women's team won the Euro football, and the women's rugby team got to the final of the women's rugby and were absolutely robbed following a clash of heads, and a player got sent off. But we do have one of England's own in that game, was Vicky Cornborough, who started her playing career at Portsmouth. And as a former committee member and member of Portsmouth Rugby Club, I can say that Vicky is very active at the
Oh, Ian, I've just lost you. I don't know whether you've just muted yourself. So Ian just seems to have lost his internet temporarily. Let me just try and get Ian.
I think I'm back.
You're back. You are back.
I'm back. Yeah. So what I was saying is that Vicky Cornborough, who played for England in the World Cup final, is very active at Portsmouth Rugby Club. You know, from a women's rugby perspective, that has grown from sort of 8-10 years ago. There was, you know, we struggled to raise a women's team at Portsmouth. There are now 2 teams playing almost every weekend, and we've got as many women members as we have men. So whilst I think this is it's right that we should be celebrating the success in women's sport, I think actually there is a bigger job of work to do in terms of the decline of team sport. If you look across all of the indicators of cricket and football and rugby, women's sport is actually growing, which is fantastic news. But participation in team sport generally is rapidly on the decline, and I think there is an element of, whilst I think we should definitely celebrate the success of the women of Portsmouth, I think I would be focusing our efforts in terms of getting more people playing more team sport. And you'll just have to trust me, Simon, that as a man who advocates the playing of team sport and loves it, it is good for you.
I don't disagree. I've heard that it's wholesome and good for you. It's just not something I was ever any good at. I played precisely one rugby game for my school, and had all sorts of things shouted at me because I was too scared to tackle someone because I would have got boots in my face. I won't repeat what the guy said.
No, yes, there is an element of I recognise it's.
But this was the late 80s, so to be fair, you know, it's a different.
Yes, yeah, no, and to be fair,
different century.
Yes, no, and now it's interesting that the latest development at Portsmouth Rugby Club will be walking rugby, that they're looking to get up and going, which is a tag related game rather than you having to be brutalized by some 20-stone giant. Obviously, as the man who was the 20-stone giant, I rather enjoyed the brutalization more than most.
You just like making people suffer, Ian.
Absolutely.
So can we very quickly touch on the questions, because there was quite a smattering of questions.
Yeah, so the questions are all there, but there's I guess we read through them all, and I read through them all this morning and sort of looked at them, and there seems to be a sort of flavour of them that some of them seem a little bit forced. Some of them have got a touch of gotcha about them. You know, we'd like to ask the cabinet member for X or Y to explain why they haven't, or ask them whether they've done the thing that we know they haven't done, so that we can either get them to confess they haven't done it, or we can call them fibber if they say that they have. So
it kind of ranges from, can you give us an update on what's happening with Bransbury Park? Does the council confirm? Can the council confirm whether there are lease agreements with third parties that allow their land to be sublet?
Gotcha.
What is the value of the crate loads of PPE that's sat in a car park underneath the civic offices?
Gotcha.
Because it's not like we've learned recently that it's worth having that stuff hanging around. How did the cabinet member for traffic and transportation come to the analysis that they did regarding the speed survey data for Langston Road in Baffin's ward? Plastic discs were put into road surfaces in the city to assist parking schemes. What's happened to them? They seem to have disappeared. Why did Portsmouth fail to attract additional investment from Arts Council national portfolio organisations?
Gotcha.
Following the decisions, what are the council doing to what are the criteria for making sure that the council isn't investing, for example, in the Qatari National Bank? And would the cabinet member for the council works advise when the works on Devonshire Avenue will commence and after the survey? So that, I think that's about their traffic reductions. And then the last one was well, sorry, not the last one. What did the council and the cabinet members do to greet and welcome the representatives of the US Navy when basically the aircraft carrier recently stayed in the Solent because it was too big to come in the harbour? A recent report outlined the delivery challenges within the trading standards team. What are those issues and what are the actions being taken? And residents in Hilsey are raising issues regarding engagement from the private sector housing team. What's being done about that? So there's a bit of a spattering of a variety of kind of different things, and the link to these is in the comments if anyone wants to go and read them in detail. But as you say, there's a bit of like some of these are kind of like you didn't meet the US Navy, you snubbed the US Navy. Is that kind of how you're reading that?
Yeah, I think there's an element of again, it feels like some of them are being asked because we think we should ask something. It's interesting that there seems to be a growing of the questions as there's a reduction in the notice of motions, and I guess they'll be quicker because I think there's an element of question, answer, clarifying point, the end. But yeah, kind of there's almost an element of if the council at any point, it's always no overall control. If there could be cross-party support for putting you and I in charge of it, there's an element of I think we'd run through this agenda pretty quickly and go, no, not bothering with that one. That one can go. No, stop being silly. And yeah, we'd tighten everything up. That could be our Christmas blessing to the good councillors of Portsmouth.
Jobs in democratic services await us both. Not
absolutely, absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. The sweet joy of benign dictatorship. So yeah, no. Well, we'll see whether that comes on the notices of motion for January. We'll see if anyone starts advocating for us. But the football is ongoing. I haven't heard any screaming from the other room, so I'm guessing that it's still quiet. So if you're listening to this as the podcast, then hopefully England have won and everybody will be cheering. But yeah, looks like it's going to be our last show of the year next week. So we just pulling that together now, and then we're going to take a bit of Christmas and New Year off, recharge our batteries, and basically wait for something exciting to happen in the world of politics that will allow us to produce our next vibrant show.
Indeed, Kim. Never let it be said that we don't respond to topical issues. Kimberly informs us in the comments that it's currently 0-0.
Absolutely. Well, that's marvellous. That means I missed half an hour of dull football. You've been listening to the Pompey Politics podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sansby. As Ian said, join us next week, 6:27. Facebook and YouTube will be live, or you can catch us later wherever you get your podcasts. Join us for the last show of the year. But don't forget to like, follow, share, subscribe, all of those lovely things. But if you have cake, you can send that as well.
Yeah, we like cake.
We like cake.